Good morning, everyone. I dedicate today's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shlomo Rabinowitz, Shlomo Bas Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. We're in Mishnayos Meiser Sheni, Perek Hey, Chapter 5, Mishna Tes, Mishna 9. We have been discussing the mitzvah of beer, that Erev Pesach of the 4th and 7th years of the Shemitah cycle, any of the Trumas, Maisrix, etc., have to be removed. Some of them have to be given to those who are designated for, and others, such as the Meiser Sheni Bikurim, have to be destroyed. Now, the next Mishnah can deal with a case where a person wasn't near those fruits, those produce, those things that he has to remove. He's not there to do it. So how do you take care of it? And the Gemara and the Mishnah rather is going to give us a example of such a thing that happened. A person whose produce is far away from him. He has to give each one a name, meaning he has to give each one of them their owner. So as we said in yesterday's Mishnah, talking about Truma, Meiser Rishon, Meiser Ani, those things that actually go to people. At Beer, the mitzvah Beer is to give it to them by that point of time, by Erev Pesach. Now, if you're not nearby to actually take it and give it to somebody, you're going to have to find a way of making it that person's. I mean, if I have truma that wasn't given away yet, I have to find a way that even though I'm not near that truma to actually take it and give it to the Kohen, I've got to find or the Meiser to the lady. I have to find a way to make it his, even though I'm not nearby to actually give it to him. I have to make it his, even though I'm not near it to do so. And there are ways of doing that. Ma'aser Rabbi Gamliel v'Zakenim. The story took place from Gamliel and the elders, other sages that were with him on this boat. Shoyboyim Besvina. They were traveling by boat, and they realized that not too far off from Erev Pesach, they're not going to have enough time to get back to take care of beer. Rabbi Gamliel. So Rabbi Gamliel made the following statement. Now, it's important to know that depending on the situation, it depends what's going to have to get done from afar. So we learned previously that once the produce has already had Gemar Malach done, they're gone through their processing has been completed, and therefore now it's permissible to actually separate the Trumas and Maisros from it. At that point, even if you haven't actually designated Trumas and Maisros, it's still Tevel, there's still a mitzvah beer. You got to make sure that you actually separate the Trumas and Maisros, and then also give it to the person who's supposed to get it. Whether it be a Levi, a Kohen, a poor person. Okay. So now, if you're not nearby, and you haven't even designated the Truma, meaning it's still Tevel, you have to designate the Truma. Which the way you would do that is if let's say you have a pile of grain, to designate the Truma or the Meiser Ani, you would say the grain on the northern part of the northern part of the pile should be Truma, and on the southern side should be Meiser. I mean, you just have to designate a place. You have to designate the produce in a way that you kind of designate a part of it, and you specify a part of it to say it should be Truma, it should be Meiser, it should be Meiser Ani. So there, what you did is you designated, you halachically separated, didn't physically separate, but you have separated. You've designated a part as either Truma or Meiser Ani, and now the rest of it is in Tevel. So the only thing you're left now doing is that which you've designated, you got to get it to someone. If you actually designated it beforehand, then you don't have to designate it from afar, but he designated it. If you physically separated it, but it just never got to a person, you got to make sure it gets to the person. You have to make sure somebody becomes an owner of it in order to fulfill the mitzvah beer. So in this case, Rabbi Gamliel said, Isser shani asid lamed, a tenth that I will in the future measure out. Natzin Yehoshua is given to Yehoshua. That was the sage Rabbi Yehoshua. He was a Levi. And its place is rented to him. So what Ramgilo did is like this. First thing he did was he said the Meiser, the wording of the Mishnah is Isser, the tithe, the tenth, that I'm going to measure out. So the commentaries understand that to me that Rabbi Gamliel's case, he had already designated the Meiser. He designated. There was a pile of grain. He designated a part of it as Meiser. That part became Meiser, but he never measured it out. It means he never actually separated it. And therefore, he says, that which in the future I will separate, I want to now give it to a Levi. Which Levi? Rabbi Yeshua, who's right here. He's a Levi. Now, the thing is, though, how exactly is Rabbi Yeshua going to take ownership of that Meiser? You can't just by saying it's his, that doesn't make it his. You have to go through a king. You have to do an act of acquisition. What act are you going to do? Well, the thing is that you might think, well, take out some money and pay him for it. The problem is that money, according to Torah law, does not acquire movable objects. But you have to pay, of course, and you acquire something, you got to pay for it. But we know that money can also be the form of acquisition. Money cannot be the act of acquisition for movable objects. And therefore, money is not going to help here. So in what way, what transaction was done to make that Meiser his? And that is why Rabbi Yeshua stated, its place is rented to him. That means is that the area where the Meiser Sheni is, Rabbi Gamliel said, I'm renting that to him. Now, that's property. Property you can acquire with money. So Rabbi Yeshua could take out some money and give it to Rabbi Gamliel, and he's rented the property. The halacha is that if you have movable objects sitting on property, and you make an acquisition, you make a kinyan, you do an act of acquisition on the property. Once this acquisition is working for the property, it can work for the movable objects also. Money alone on the movable objects it's not an act of acquisition. But once the money is acting as an acquisition for the land that the money is sitting on, that the movable object is sitting on, that the grain is sitting on, once the land that the grain is sitting on, once the land that the Meiser, that's been designated for Rabbi Yeshua, is sitting on the ground, is there on the ground as you're using the money to acquire the ground. Once the money works to acquire the ground, it can work to acquire the movable objects that are on the ground also. And therefore, by renting out the place where the Meiser was sitting to Rabbi Yeshua, as he acquired the area, the property for rental, as a rental, he also acquired the Meiser. I mean, the ground is only a rental. That's not relevant. It doesn't make a difference what kind of a kinyan it is, what the acquisition is. As long as there's an act of acquisition happening, it can act as an act of acquisition for the movable object on the ground also. Okay, that was the first thing that he did. Then he said, Iser Acher, another tenth, Shani Asilamite, that I'm going to measure out in the future when I get back. Nasan Akiva ben Yosef Shiiska Bailania. That's given to Akiva ben Yosef. That was Rabbi Akiva. Shiiska Bailaniim. That he should acquire it for the poor. Meaning, the second tithing was Meiser Ani. It was a Meiser Ani year. It was a year that you don't take the Meiser Sheni to Yerushalayim. It was the year of the second tenth going to the poor. So now he had to get it to the poor. Who was going to acquire it for the poor? Akiva ben Yosef. Rabbi Akiva was a Gabbai Tzedakah. He was a person involved. He was a manager for Tzedakah. He was the one in charge of distributing to the poor. He was in charge of that. And therefore, he could actually acquire it for the poor. So to fulfill the mitzvah beer on the Meiser Ani, it's enough for him to get it to the poor. A specific poor man, not necessarily, but he gets it to the poor. He makes it a property of the poor. The Gabbai Tzedakah, the person in charge of distributing, acts as an agent for the poor. And now, through his act of acquisition, the poor now own it. No one else can have it. Somebody poor is eventually going to get it. But at this point and now, it belongs in general to the poor. Just like Truma, that you separate, belongs to all Kohanim, and then eventually one Kohen takes it. Same thing by the poor. It can be possible for it to belong to the poor, and then eventually one specific poor man is going to get it. That was enough for him to fulfill the mitzvah beer of getting it to the poor. He got it to the poor through the Gabai, through the one in charge of it. Yeah, that's my understanding. Understanding is the wording is to the poor. It doesn't say to a specific poor person. So they would seem that would work. And again, umakim muskerlai, and the place where it's sitting is rented to him. Rabbi Akiva rents the ground. The kinyan of the money that works on the ground will now be a kinyan on the Meiser Ani for the poor. Okay. Now, so Rabbi Gamliel took care of his Meiser Rishon, the Meiser to the Levi. He took care of the Meiser Ani that goes to the poor. What about Truma to the Kohen? No mention of that. And there, the commentaries say that it's not typical to actually, there was a season. There was a season where you harvested your grain and eventually you stored it in the silos. And when the harvest was done, you went on your business. Well, Rabbi Gamliel now was gone. That means it was after the time of harvesting, especially, it's Erev Pesach. The whole harvest is for sure done. And it was, and the typical practice was that immediately upon the completion of the process, Truma was separated. Meiser maybe would wait till later, but Truma was taken care of right away. So therefore, he didn't talk about Truma because that was taken care of way before, because that was the practice with Truma. Theoretically, though, if he didn't, he would have gone through the same process and given it to a Kohen. Now, all right, so this is the first part of the story. Now, I'm Rabbi Yeshua. Now, Rabbi Yeshua was a Levi. A Levi has to separate a tenth from his tenth to the Kohen. The mitzvah bir applies to the Levi also. So now Rabbi Yeshua had to take care of what he's supposed to give, what's called Trumas Meiser, what goes from the Meiser to the Kohen. Rabbi Yeshua said, Isser Shani Asa Lamud, the tenth that I am going to measure out, Nasu Elazar ben Azariah, is given to Elazar the son of Azariah. He was a Kohen. So he's giving Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah the Trumas Meiser, and the area that it's sitting on is rented to him. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is going to rent the area, the ground that the Trumas Meiser is sitting on, and as he acquires the ground with the money, he will now acquire the acquisition done on the ground will be an acquisition for the Trumas Meiser also. And they accepted from each other the wages. That means Rabbi Gamliel got the money, the money to make the rental on the ground and also on the Meiser from Rabbi Yeshua. He got the money from Rabbi Akiva to rent the ground and to acquire the Meiser Ani for the poor. And Rabbi Yeshua got money from Elazar ben Azariah, who rented the ground where the Trumas Meiser was sitting, and everything was taken care of. One last thing on this is that, so here we have examples of when you're far away, how you could take care of those things that Biur obligates you to give them to the people they're supposed to get to. This is how you do it. But what about if he would have had Meiser Sheni lying around? What if he would have had Bikurim lying around? Where Biur says, if you don't take care of it by then, you have to destroy it. You're not nearby to destroy it. What do you do then? And now it could very well be that, if somebody else was there and they saw it to be destroyed, they would destroy it. But, what if it comes out that you don't have anybody else to destroy it? What happens then? Well, it means that you missed the time to do Biur, which was Erev Pesach. You missed that time. And when you get home, then you're going to have to destroy it. We are continuing with the laws of Lashon Harah from the Chavetz Chaim, Klal Zayin, chapter 7, Seif Daled, paragraph 4. V'hu adin, the same law applies about the prohibition of accepting Lashon Harah. Im yatsa koil al echad she'asa ma'aser shdiber davar shlo karoi al pi haTorah. A rumor is going around. A rumor that somebody did something or said something that is not appropriate according to Torah law. Ben shu iser chamer, ben shu iser kal, whether the rumor is about something serious or something not as serious. And a rumor means this is what people are saying. It's forbidden to accept it as the truth. But again, consider the possibility of it until the matter gets clarified. All the more so, you have to be very careful if you find a reason, if you're going to be telling it over to others. You cannot be doing it in order to, spread the rumor even more. If you're telling it to someone because you're trying to figure out what's going on, that's one thing. But to go ahead and to spread the rumor more, that for sure you can't do. You can't say, well, it's out there already, I'm not doing anything. You cannot intend to spread the rumor more. Now we got to Sif Hey, paragraph 5. Everything we're saying until now about the prohibition of accepting Lashon Hara, meaning accepting it as a fact, as a truth. Hu b'stam ish Yisrael. That is talking about by call him a regular Jew, a person that we assume is observant. We have no reason to think he's not observant, and therefore, since he is observant, he has what we call a cheskes kashrus, an established status of being observant, of doing the right thing, and you can't believe that he would have said he sinned. But if, let's say, a person is well known as a sinner means this is someone who knows better and he still commits the sin, meaning he does a sin that everybody knows is forbidden. We're not talking about saying things that people can, find an excuse for or think it's not forbidden. We're talking about here something that everybody knows that it's forbidden. This is a person who knows better, he knows it's forbidden, and he still committed it. And doing, like, for instance, the example he gives is an act of adultery. If it's been established that this person, how does it get established? Things get established about people. People act in a certain way that eventually people know that this is what's happening to the person. This is what's happened to the person. So if you know that the person has come to this point in his life, that he has basically made himself a rasha. He attained the status of a wicked person, and that status is there because it is well known that he has committed these very grave sins intentionally, knowing that how grave they are, and he still does it. So he has basically become classified as a rasha, as a wicked person. Al ish kazeh muter lekabel lashon hara. And this person, you are allowed to accept Lashon Hara. Once the person is basically a rasha, once he's become a rasha, he's taken himself, so to speak, out of the fold. And at that point, we don't have the responsibilities to him anymore, depending on what we're talking about. But a lot of the responsibilities that we have to follow Jew, we don't have to him. Doesn't mean we don't try to bring him back. But from the point of the letter of the law, does the law of accepting Lashon Hara apply to this person? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because once he's a rasha, then we can believe anything on him. And therefore, when we have been discussing until now a matter of the prohibition of accepting Lashon Hara, it's talking about a person who hasn't been established as a rasha, as a person who's wicked. We'll do one last short paragraph, Sif Vav. Someone comes to tell you what's going on in his life. And he tells you something in which is something that, as he tells you the story, he is putting himself down and someone else. He's basically telling you, I and this person did something wrong. That's what comes out. So he's speaking Lashon Hara, but he's including himself in it. If you admit you did something wrong, I can believe it. I can accept it as a fact. But just because I can believe you about yourself, doesn't mean I can believe you about someone else, even though you're including him in your story about yourself. You can be including him in the story about yourself, but at the same time, you can only believe what you've admitted to, but not what you said about someone else. Have a great day.